Well, that really depends on what kind of plane you're flying. Depends on what phase of flight you're in. And it depends on whether we're talking about the present day or not. A lot has changed since those days flying that plane. The C-141 was the first all-jet transport plane in the U.S., maybe the world, I'm not sure. But as such, it didn't really have very modern equipment on board. So the division of labor, what each person had to do was pretty high for each person. The co-pilot had to know how to fly the plane in all weather, in all conditions, just as the pilot did. The co-pilot also had to know how to function or manipulate most of the systems in conjunction with the flight engineer. The co-pilot generally had less responsibility. That was the big difference. The pilot acted as, in the military, what we call the aircraft commander as well. So that means like the captain of the ship. What the pilot says, ends up being what's carried out. But co-pilot is just, you think of it more like an on-the-job, captain in training kind of guy. That's what the co-pilot's job involved.
Did you have any tough times adjusting to life in the military from civilian life?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's very different to civilian life, but I suppose it was a steady ramp up for me, I guess. In high school, we had a junior ROTC program, Air Force ROTC program, and I did that. So I got a glimpse into what it might sort of be like in the Air Force. And then, as I mentioned, I went to college at the Air Force Academy, and that was like 24/7 turbo Air Force. So that was probably the biggest adjustment from life as a civilian to life in the military was actually the first year, the freshman year at the Air Force Academy. It's a big culture change. Some might call it a culture shock. But interestingly enough, I probably couldn't tell you what the key differences were as an adult between military life and civilian life until just the past few years, because when I went to the Air Force Academy, I was 17. You guys can probably relate to that. And the first time I was a civilian again after that was 3 years ago. So I guess I didn't have much to compare it to. So I kind of thrust myself into the military lifestyle really early in my adult life, or before my adult life, arguably.
Has the transition back to civilian life been hard or weird or different?
Yeah, different, I guess you could say. Although outside of the rigors of a military institution like the Air Force Academy, the formal school that I attended, the Air Force, serving in the military demands a different lifestyle out of you. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think the bigger transition, the bigger difference in lifestyle probably hit with my family more than it did with me. In my time in the Air Force, I pretty much got to do either exactly what I wanted to do or something pretty close to what I wanted to do. It was exciting work. Yeah, it was hard work sometimes. Sometimes it was boring work, not too often. But it was almost always something exactly like what I wanted to do. For those of us that served in the military, we would drag our families with us everywhere. Not necessarily what each family member wants to do. So we moved, I think, 5 or 6 different times in my military career. So I think as a transition, it was probably tougher for a military to civilian transition on my family than it was for me.
When did you meet your wife?
Oh, when and where?
Yeah, when and
sure.
where?
All the good details?
Yeah.
Let's see, I met my wife in right around 1989 in Vacaville, right down the road here in California. And that's when I was stationed in my transport plane unit, my C-141 squadron. And another pilot in the squadron with me had a wife who was a school teacher. And she happened to teach school with this young single gal who heard that nice group of young gentlemen hanging out at Travis, and basically she and her husband endeavored to put us on, some double dates, and I met her through them.
Cool.
Good timing.
All right. Can you tell us what was the name of the conflict you were involved in, the most recent one?
The one that you guys want to focus on for the
Yeah.
project?
Yes.
Operation Desert Storm, or as a lot of people know now, the first Gulf War.
And what years were you stationed there?
Well, again, because of the nature of the transport planes that I was flying and the worldwide aspect of being able to, go from here to there, we actually were stationed here in California.
Oh.
However, that was a pretty short conflict, as wars go, and for pretty much the duration of that war, certainly for the active fighting part of that war, I was stationed in, two bases between Germany and Saudi Arabia, and did a lot of kind of long haul shuttling of troops and equipment back and forth.
Can you tell us what that was like?
Like any new job, it was pretty exciting for starters. Exciting and anxiety filled, because for most of us, we had never had to do something like that before, where we had trained for having to fly in less than peacetime operations, but it was always just training. So it's a big eye-opener for a lot of us, and I was in my mid-20s at that point, and had already actually flown in a combat environment in Panama a couple years earlier. So I had seen that, but there were an awful lot of people around me that were either just a little bit younger than me or a few years younger than me that hadn't been involved in that process already. So it was you asked about, kind of culture shock or transition before. I think that was a big, very rapid transition for a lot of folks involved in the effort, because it wasn't just flying from point A to point B anymore. It was coordinating with friendly forces and trying to avoid enemy forces, and all the while trying to make sure that the people and the equipment got here and there safely. So it was exciting.
What was life like with your fellow pilots and servicemen? Like, do you make any really good friends? What was the atmosphere like where you were?
Yeah, during the conflict, flying in the war, you mean?
Sure. I mean, in the war and just as a transport pilot in general.
Well, in general, in that particular line of work, one of the phrases we used was, we're really a suitcase kind of an organization, meaning we would see each other, obviously, when we're on our airplane, on the same crew, but we didn't always fly with the same crew. So you might see a pilot or a co-pilot, and you did know each other, at least in passing, but you might only work with them once or twice in a whole year. And that was kind of part of the excitement of it too. You got to work with different people every month, pretty much. So it was better than, personally, I think it was better than how the bomber crews do it, or did do it, and they probably still do it. They have what's called a hard crew, where you fly with these same people every day, and you do that for months or years at a time. So, and while there's nothing wrong with that, because you certainly get to know each other very well, and you can probably, maximize your potential as a team, I kind of like the variety of personalities and how to learn how to work with each other with their differences.
Did you develop any friendships through this, or was it?
Oh, sure, yeah. And I still talk to this day, at least on occasion, to a lot of people that I've flown with in the Air Force. Yeah, it's in fact the group of people that I still identify with the best are the ones I went to school with, the ones I went to the academy with. The best man at our wedding was one of my roommates at the academy, and I stay in touch with him really regularly, as with a number of others. It's gotten a lot easier the last few years with social networking on computers and so on. But yeah, that's I think, again, going back to that whole transition and culture shock sort of idea, since those were the ones that we were shocked together, so we were the ones that still have the strongest bonds of friendship.
What kind of, I guess, military action did you see while flying